Cyber Monday. I'm Christian Redshaw. Joining me as always is my wonderful co-host, Dominic Fogel.
That's me.
Dominic, who do we have in the hot seat today?
Well, we have my good friend and buddy Ai-Kao Chang. He's the enterprise risk manager over at Best Buy Canada. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have with him. He's an aspect I'm really looking forward to talking with him about is about supply chain risk for organizations that really need to understand that there is an upstream and downstream risk in terms of how they're doing business, that a lot of organizations need to be able to demonstrate cybersecurity, not just compliance, but be able to demonstrate that they have a cybersecurity program. And a lot of small and mid-sized businesses don't understand that. So I'm looking forward to chatting with him about that.
Yeah, Ai-Kao is a very mild-mannered person,
Yes,
but
he
don't
is.
be fooled by that demeanor. He is a powerhouse of critical business information that is very relevant to our business audience.
Totally.
So I'm going to jump into this chair. We're going to invite Ai-Kao in, and we'll be right back.
Ai-Kao, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us on the show today. I know we're really eager to have an awesome combo with you. I thought we would just talk first off about this whole notion of digital trust, in which right now we're in this, I guess, timeline where we're seeing data breaches coming through the daily news day in and day out. Some have argued we're becoming desensitized to data breaches, and it's brought up this whole notion of digital trust. So I guess how people trust either digitally in their information to businesses of all shapes and sizes. Basically, what does digital trust mean? Is that something that companies should be worried about moving forward? And with data breaches, are we in this new norm? I know this is a big loaded question, so let's just talk as long as you want.
Well, I think with organizations, they have to realize that they're taking in people's data
Yep.
throughout different processes and technologies throughout the day. So it's important for them to identify how this data gets fed into the system. Now, the problem for a lot of organizations is they don't realize where and how people are using and managing this data. And people from different business units are constantly, hey, you know what, I could use this piece of data, I'll just take it. And they're not involving the necessary parties in the organization that may have a better understanding of how this data needs to be managed, right? So security departments, or their legal departments, as well as how IT needs to put in the controls in place to protect the data.
Right. And from that broader commentary point of view, in which, a lot of people in the security circles will say, it's not a matter of if you get breached, it's a matter of when. The way sort of the public is going to be perceiving that notion, should people be saying, okay, we're going to expect data breaches, but we're going to expect businesses to react in a way in which it's minimizing the negative impact on people? Like I said, it's this weird aspect in which we're in now, in which it's almost like saying, would we expect financial fraud from companies all the time? It's like, well, there was a time when that was true, but regulations have come into fact there. But so when we're looking at this from 10,000 feet, your big crystal ball, what does that look like from a data breach perspective? Are we going to keep seeing these happening in the news for the next 2, 3, 5 years? Or are we going to see further change in terms of how the public perceives it?
Well, Dominic, I fully agree with what you just said. One of the key things is not if, but when.
Yeah.
But also how much of the data is breached.
Yes.
So what organizations could do is minimize the risk and put into the controls that, hey, you know what, if someone does hack into an organization, how much could they get?
Right.
Do you have the proper controls in place to minimize the loss?
Yeah.
And to monitor, hey, if something happens, we could actually stop any further breaches from happening.
Right. And maybe last question on this before we dive into another aspect there. For small and mid-sized businesses, and they may not have the same resources that an enterprise company may have, in terms of how they should be focusing in terms of their sort of security aspects, in terms of what they should focus on. Often we'll often hear, we have antivirus, we're good, we're secure. There's that emphasis on the preventative side of things, but not so much on the detection and response. In terms of what your thoughts are and what you're seeing, do you think it's advisable for organizations, again, particularly in the small and mid-sized business space, to focus more of their efforts on sort of how they'll respond to that inevitable data breach, rather than just overloading on protective or preventative capabilities?
Well, one of the things that people always talk about is people, process, and technology, right? And organizations need to just focus away from purely from a technological perspective, but sort of sit down and look at, hey, what's our governance that we have in place, right? do we have an understanding of our landscape in our organization, where data is being fed in, who is touching the data? So organizations need to have a honest look at themselves.
Right.
Does these technologies that we put in place really do what they need to do?
Right.
Like people would put in SIMs into their organizations,
Yep.
but is it just there to say that they have this control in place?
Right.
Or are they actually effectively looking at it?
Right.
So if, for instance, the small organizations, if they don't feel that they actually have the knowledge to actually do the evaluation themselves, I would recommend that they hire a third party or someone with the knowledge to help them.
Right. Like a partner to be able to work through
To
that.
assessment, understand their security landscape,
Gotcha.
where the maturity is.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's awesome advice. Absolutely. Yeah.
So Ai-Kao, for businesses and business leaders watching us today, they have upstream and downstream supply chain relationships. They have suppliers and they have people that they supply. So it's obviously important that they take their security seriously. Also, they have their customers and their clients as well. What can they do to demonstrate that they're doing security well, considering that it's already established that it's an important thing to do? What can they do to show this?
So Christian, one of the key things is whether you're a large organization or small organization, it's important to understand the business model and what's data you're being passed between your organization and whether it's an upstream or a downstream organization, right? So when you're sitting down with these companies that you are potentially doing business with them, it's important to have a standardized, like a third-party risk assessment, for instance, that could actually help evaluate their security maturity, right?
Because you inherit the security vulnerabilities of your suppliers, in essence.
Exactly. And when you're doing business with them, if anything happens with them, your reputation is also on the line as well, too. They would basically list, hey, you know what?
Right.
You work with company A,
Yeah.
whether you're upstream or downstream, they'll still see that you're being impacted
Right.
by these organizations.
Right. Yeah. And when we're talking about, it's an interesting space. This whole notion of vendor risk management has really exploded in the past year or two. Like you're saying there, in terms of this broader cyber risk due diligence, companies are very gun shy about working with certain organizations unless they can prove a certain level of adherence to various security frameworks, or if they're able to at least go through the questionnaire. One of the things that we've seen is that there's a lack of standardization when it comes to questionnaires. You'll see some which are really simple, which were like a 10-question template, which is done up in Word. Others are tied back to a really complicated online system in which maybe there's 1,000 questions which have to be done. From a small and mid-sized business perspective, if they're trying to sell their product in the B2B landscape, are there certain certifications? I know we've talked about like PCI or ISO or the CIS Top 20. Again, a lot of them will be contextual in terms of what their business is and who they're selling it to, but are there certain certifications that businesses should start steering towards or maybe steer away from?
That's a good question, Dominic. I think depending on what services you're getting from these organizations and what information they're being passed back and forth, I think it's important to have risk assessments that could identify the level of risk, right? When you're dealing with business with these people. But I think for things like data centers, if you're going to leverage someone's data center, it's good to have like a SOC 2 report, for instance, or SOC 1 reports. If you're dealing with someone that's going to be managing your payments, then PCI for sure. Right. Or they're taking credit payments on your behalf.
Right.
And depending on the size of these organizations, when you're dealing with them, you could see the level of maturity from them as well too, that they have an understanding of their environments. And when you ask them questions, they get back to you with non-conflicting answers.
Right.
So these are things that you could see, hey, you know what? These people know what they're doing.
Yes.
So these are some of the signs that could help you work with the proper vendors.
Right, and that's really interesting because Chris and I have seen a whole slew of different types of vendor risk assessments that various clients of ours have had to deal with over the years, and what we've heard from others as well is that it's part art, part science, in which you don't want to, if you're filling that out, you don't want to share too much information, but you don't want to share too little as well. It's again that art form in which you don't want someone on the other side to suddenly raise a red flag on something which may end up just being going down a rabbit hole. In terms of a process, in terms of how small and mid-sized businesses can be a little more efficient in that, a lot of companies we see just sort of take it on a one-by-one basis. Is there something that they can do to at least make that a little more standardized or a little more efficient? And maybe that's, like you mentioned earlier about some of these certifications, will that make going through a vendor risk management process easier?
Oh, for sure. If people already have existing certification,
Yeah.
and they could see that your controls have already been tested,
Right.
additional work does not need to be done to reassess
Right.
your environments,
Right.
right? And
Right.
it provides them with trust.
Right.
Whether you evaluate your environments based on NIST
Yeah.
or ISO.
Yeah, you mentioned about the cloud and data centers, especially a lot of, let's say, newer companies are leveraging. They don't have in-house data centers. They're not like traditional companies in which there's an on-prem data center. Everything is in the cloud, whether that be Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS or lower tier cloud providers. Often, what we've seen with this mindset in which a lot of these organizations will say, "Hey, you know what? We don't have to worry about security because that's in the cloud. Amazon handles our cloud." And I know you know this, but there's that notion of a shared responsibility in which just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean you dust your hands and say, "Okay, I'm out. We're good." What should small and mid-sized businesses, at least again from a security perspective, think about if everything is indeed in the cloud? Where do they draw that line? What's Amazon's and what's theirs?
Well, here's my challenge is that for like organizations that I work with, we have the resources and people
Yeah.
to actually throw in and go like, hey, we're gonna sit down, look at their, like for instance, AWS or Google Cloud,
Yeah.
look at their contracts, look at their SOC 1 or SOC 2 reports,
Yeah.
and identify the common controls that we are responsible for and how we go about maintaining the security controls that we are responsible for.
Yeah.
For smaller organizations, they may not have the resource to do that.
Yeah.
So if they don't, I would suggest that they work with a professional that could actually help them evaluate this.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. That notion again specifically at the small and mid-sized businesses, and I think we're seeing this a lot with tech companies or smaller tech companies, is that notion in which they are saying, we're so busy in growth mode in which they're trying to get their application all out and running. They're trying to acquire new customers. Security seems to be an afterthought. I think I know what your answer is going to be, but
You do. I know you do.
what can we do to maybe instill a different mindset with, again, it's not necessarily the technology people, but maybe the people running the business, that the security aspect needs to be thought of from day one, because it's easier to plan out the security from the beginning, because rather than if you're a 2-person company, especially with a lot of these tech startups, they could easily be a 200-person company within 9 months. So where do you start having the security discussion?
I think if possible, you build security into the business, ingrain it into every part of your process, your people, and your technology. That's probably the easiest way. Now, how do you do that? For small companies, it's probably easier.
Yeah.
But then when you have a 2-man shop, there's no space for segregation of duty. Right. So things like that. But then as you grow, you need to keep evaluate your risk as you go along. Right. Having a RACI. For instance, is huge.
Right.
Because who's doing what?
Yes.
There's always this assumption that someone else is doing something or someone else is.
And stuff falls between the cracks.
Exactly, right.
Yeah. It's interesting because security is a continuum. It's a journey.
It's a journey.
How you do security as a 3-person company is very different than when you're a 50-person company or a 500-person company. But like you're saying there, you need to security morphs. You need to be doing it throughout, but what it looks like is different throughout that journey.
So having things like KRIs to measure your risk in an organization. Because every organization's risk appetite is different.
Right.
KRI stands for what?
Key risk indicator.
Okay, so we're probably familiar with KPIs.
Yes.
KRIs.
Yeah,
Right.
they're brother and sister.
They're brother and sister.
Yeah,
Right?
it's all about measuring again how the security aspect or the security picture is improving. And I know something which we always preach with our clients is that security is not an absolute. It's relative. Whatever you do from a security perspective, you need to be more secure tomorrow than you were yesterday.
Yes,
Right?
agreed.
So no, that's really interesting, and I'm going to stop hogging the limelight.
No, so one of the areas that you deal with is governance, right?
That's correct.
And when we're talking about cybersecurity leadership and oversight, what is the right way to go about leading your organization in terms of setting the tone from the top and making sure that you have good communication? What are some of the attributes of a healthy cybersecurity program?
Well, when we talk about cybersecurity, it's important that we understand that people at the top may not necessarily understand the risk involved with cybersecurity.
Right.
People always talk about from top down,
Right.
but it's also important from going from bottom or mid up.
Right.
So that if you don't tell senior management what these risks are
Yeah.
and what some of the challenges in security is,
Yeah.
then they're not going to realize that they need to be a part of it.
Right.
Right. So it's about having that communication, that open communication with them, having to bring the tough questions to them and going like, hey, you know what? We have challenges here
Yes.
and we need your support, right? And this is why.
Yes.
And bringing that tone where it's not technical,
Yeah.
but actually explaining to them and quantifying to them what the impact is.
Yes.
And they understand dollars. That's
Sure.
what people understand.
That's the
Right.
language
Right.
of business.
Exactly.
It's finance.
Right.
And if you're providing that risk information to the top level, the strategic level, they can then make informed strategic business decisions as a result of that. Maybe things that would take out the business normally or take out the competition, they stay in business because they can navigate through the risks, which is an awesome differentiator. So that's top down and bottom up. What about in terms of how companies often will operate in silos in different departments? So you've got your HR, your IT, sales and marketing, customer service. How do you break down the silos and have good communication between all of them? And I guess I'm touching on enterprise risk management as well there, where you've got all these other types of risks going on all throughout the organization. How can you get good communication and good risk management laterally?
You know, getting that security message laterally is the challenge
Yeah.
for every organization. I think it's developing a relationship where instead of saying no to people all the time, right? Because that's what I think a lot of security people tend to do. You can't do that, right? But working with them and going like, hey, you know what? This is what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
This is why we're trying to accomplish this. And these are the risks involved.
Yeah.
If we can't do this,
Yeah.
we could try something else,
Right.
right?
Yep.
But you have to put in the proper controls in place and work with them to develop these controls,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I think once they realize that you're not a blocker all the time,
You're an enabler.
you're an enabler. Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to be enablers of business, right?
Yes, yes.
We need to be a business partner
Yeah.
and ingrain ourselves into each business unit,
Yeah.
if possible.
Yes.
So that means that we have to be involved as much as we can
Yeah.
with them,
Yeah.
whether that is working with them, having daily periodic updates
Yeah. Yeah.
on how business is doing,
Yeah.
as well as developing awareness programs as well, too,
Yes.
right?
And you know, when we're talking about that enterprise setting, you know, how that works at small and mid-sized business as well, I would imagine some of those same siloed problems exist there as well. It's an important thing, like you're saying, they're having clear and consistent communication across the organization, regardless of who is in charge of security. That needs to be a frequent, I guess, discussion point. That this isn't just a once a year checkup. You know, what's the cybersecurity pulse? You know, on the annual board review kind of thing. It has to be a frequent discussion point as well.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And people need to realize that a lot of these big decisions that people make has a security impact to them,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you need to work with people as much as possible, even having when you get a water
Yeah.
at the water tank,
Yeah.
have a chat with people, right?
Yes.
Understand. Don't be the scary security person, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting position that security people are in because they've got to speak technology language, they've got to speak business language to be able to be relatable and collaborate, and then they have to understand risk as well.
Yes.
So it's this constant translation
Yeah.
of, feeding up into the mission and the strategic objectives of the organization. It's a really interesting spot.
It's interesting, but it's a challenge. It's fun.
Well, it keeps us employed, right?
Yeah,
So we really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us in studio. You absolutely crushed it, and I'll compliment you on the shirt there as well.
I love your shirt, too.
We have the same supplier.
Yes.
So,
I didn't get the memo.
but thank you again for coming in studio. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Christian and Dominic.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. And we'll be right back with Christian and I. We'll wrap things up.
That was a fantastic episode. I really especially appreciated how he talked about how sometimes the leadership doesn't understand what's going on when it comes to cyber risk in the organization. So yes, it's important to have that top-down, set the tone from the top communication, but it's also important for different parts of the organization to be feeding up so that the leader can be informed about what's going on and make good strategic decisions.
Yeah, and Ai-Kao has that incredible insight because he's worked for some really large organizations, and on that note about decision making, he was really saying how more and more business leaders, a lot of them in the enterprise setting understand that, but for small and mid-sized businesses, a lot of them don't understand that a lot of the big decisions that they make, there's a lot of sort of a cybersecurity impact to that, which is underpinning that, and they just don't understand that. So the greater we can sort of increase that knowledge, I think that you'll see decision makers making better decisions.
And again, remember that he's coming from a larger organization.
Yes.
It's very instructive as to if you're a small organization wanting to sell to a large organization, how do they see that?
Totally.
So thanks for watching. If you want to watch our other podcasts, you can go to conversationsthatmatter.tv, and we will see you next Monday.